The Apollo Lunar Module looked nothing like a normal spacecraft. It had no wings, no smooth aerodynamic body, no heat shield, and no way to survive a return through Earth's atmosphere. To the eye, it seemed fragile, almost temporary, with thin panels, exposed legs, odd angles, and reflective coverings. But that strange appearance was the key to its purpose. The lunar module was not designed to fly through air. It was designed to work only in space, where there is no atmosphere and where every unnecessary kilogram makes the mission harder. Its job was narrow, dangerous, and historic: carry 2 astronauts from lunar orbit down to the moon, keep them alive on the surface, then launch them back to the command module waiting above. At first, the spacecraft was called the Lunar Excursion Module, or LEM. Later, the name was shortened to Lunar Module, but the concept remained the same. Apollo did not send one single spaceship to land on the moon and return intact. Instead, the mission used several specialized pieces. The Command and Service Module carried the crew across deep space and back toward Earth, but it was too heavy and too differently shaped to land on the moon. The Lunar Module was the dedicated lander. It traveled to lunar orbit attached to the larger Command and Service Module, then separated for the descent. This approach, called Lunar Orbit Rendezvous, made the mission possible because it reduced the amount of mass that had to land and lift off again. The lunar module was built in 2 main stages. The lower half was the descent stage, the part responsible for getting the crew safely from orbit to the lunar surface. It carried the landing legs, fuel, oxidizer, batteries, supplies, scientific equipment, and the descent engine. That engine had to do more than simply slow the spacecraft down. It had to allow a controlled powered landing, with enough flexibility for the astronauts to adjust their path near the surface. The moon had no runway and no prepared landing pad. The crew had to avoid craters, slopes, and boulders while using limited fuel. Once the descent stage touched down, it stayed behind forever, becoming both the base of the spacecraft and the launch platform for the return. The upper half was the ascent stage, and it carried the astronauts back into lunar orbit. This section contained the crew cabin, controls, guidance systems, communications gear, life support equipment, and the ascent engine. It did not need landing legs, because it would never touch down again. It did not need a streamlined exterior, because there was no air to move through. It only needed to do one thing reliably: lift off from the moon and rendezvous with the command module. When it was time to leave, the ascent stage separated from the descent stage. The lower stage remained on the surface, while the upper stage fired upward. If that engine had failed, the astronauts would have had no rescue vehicle waiting on the moon. The lunar module's unusual shape came from ruthless engineering trade-offs. On Earth, vehicles are often designed around air resistance, structural loads, weather, and runway performance. The LM faced a different environment. It operated in vacuum and low gravity, so it did not need an aerodynamic shell. But it did need to survive intense temperature swings, support human life, and use as little mass as possible. Every pound sent to the moon required fuel, rocket power, and careful planning. That is why its body looked skeletal. The reflective gold and silver coverings were not decoration; they helped control heat in sunlight and shadow. The result was a spacecraft that looked delicate but was highly optimized for a place where ordinary aircraft design rules did not apply. Building the lunar module was far from easy. Grumman, the company overseeing its development, had to create a vehicle unlike anything that had flown before. It was crude, but it could not be tested like an airplane. It had rocket engines, but it was not simply a launch vehicle. It was a life support system, a navigation platform, a lander, and a return craft all in one. Development problems delayed its first uncrewed flight by about 10 months and its first crewed flight by about 3 months. Those delays mattered because Apollo was working under enormous political and technical pressure. Yet the final result became one of the most reliable parts of the Apollo-Saturn system, despite being one of the strangest and most specialized. NASA tested the lunar module in stages before trusting it with a landing. Apollo 5 was the first LM flight, launched without a crew into low Earth orbit. It tested important systems, including engine operation and staging, without risking astronauts. Apollo 9 then carried a crewed lunar module into Earth orbit. There, astronauts practiced separating from the command module, flying independently, and docking again. These tests were essential because the LM could not simply be flown in Earth's atmosphere for rehearsal. It was structurally and aerodynamically incapable of that kind of flight. Engineers and crews had to prove its systems through orbital tests, simulations, and carefully planned procedures, building confidence one mission at a time. Apollo 10 took the rehearsal to the Moon itself. Its lunar module, named Snoopy, separated from the command module and descended toward the lunar surface, but it did not land. This was the final full-scale test before Apollo 11. The mission proved that the spacecraft could operate in lunar orbit, follow the descent profile, communicate with mission control, and return to the command module. It tested the rhythm of the landing mission without taking the final step. Apollo 10 showed that the basic plan could work in the real lunar environment. Afterward, Snoopy's descent stage was discarded in lunar orbit, and the ascent stage was sent into orbit around the Sun, leaving it as a rare surviving remnant of the program. When Apollo 11 reached the Moon, the lunar module Eagle became the first of its kind to attempt a crewed landing. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin flew inside Eagle while Michael Collins remained in the command module Columbia. The descent was not calm or automatic in the simple sense. Computer alarms sounded, the planned landing area looked dangerous, and fuel was running low as Armstrong guided the LM toward safer terrain. The vehicle's design allowed human judgment to matter during the final moments. Eagle touched down with the descent stage beneath it, turning the lower half of the spacecraft into the first crewed landing platform on another world. Hours later, the ascent stage lifted off and proved that landing was only half the achievement. The lunar module's most unexpected moment came during Apollo 13. That mission was meant to land on the Moon, but an oxygen tank explosion damaged the command and service module on the way there. The spacecraft that was supposed to support the crew for the return trip was suddenly crippled. The lunar module Aquarius became a lifeboat. It supplied life support, electrical power, and propulsion capability at a time when the astronauts needed every backup system available. Aquarius had been designed to support 2 astronauts for a lunar landing, not 3 astronauts during an emergency journey home. But because it was an independent spacecraft with its own systems, mission control could adapt it. Apollo 13 turned the Moon lander into the reason the crew survived. In total, 10 lunar modules were launched into space. 6 of them landed humans on the Moon between 1969 and 1972. The descent stages from those missions are still sitting at their landing sites, silent and motionless in the lunar dust. They are not museum pieces behind glass, but actual mission hardware left exactly where their usefulness ended. The ascent stages had different fates. After returning crews to orbit, they were discarded, and several were crashed into the Moon. Those impacts were useful because instruments could detect the vibrations and reveal information about the Moon's interior. Other LM stages from test missions burned up during re-entry into Earth's atmosphere. Apollo 13's Aquarius also re-entered as a unit after its emergency role was complete. The Apollo Lunar Module remains a one-of-a-kind machine in human history. It was the first crewed spacecraft built to operate exclusively in space, and it is still the only crewed vehicle to land anywhere beyond Earth. Its success came from specialization. It did not try to be a capsule, airplane, launch vehicle, and lander all at once. It did exactly what the mission required and discarded everything else. That is why it looked so unusual, why it traveled attached to a larger spacecraft, and why it split into stages on the Moon. The lunar module was not beautiful in a conventional way, but it was perfectly shaped by its mission. It proved that reaching another world sometimes requires building a machine that makes sense only there. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe for more explainers.